Now let's move on to considering the foreign military bases. The United States has about 1,000 military bases that it maintains off U.S. soil in foreign countries around the world. They cost the taxpayers, that's you and me, about $250 billion a year. Here's a picture that shows where they all are. As you can see, there's huge numbers of them. They are all over the world, and you can imagine how some countries might feel being surrounded by our military bases. 95% of all the military bases that any country has on another country's soil are U.S. military bases. The meaning of that is that it's really a new form of imperialism. As Chalmers Johnson said, once upon a time you could trace the spread of imperialism by counting up the colonies. America's version of the colony is the military base. Let's also remember that the Declaration of Independence criticized the British for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us and for protecting them from punishment for any murders which they should commit on the inhabitants of these states. We wrote that in the Declaration of Independence when we were explaining to the world why we were declaring our independence from the British. You could say that foreign bases create enemies and make us less safe. For the same reason that we declared our independence from the British, other countries may be quite unhappy with us. Lastly, the money in the military budget goes to war profiteers. These are large companies which make a huge amount of money by charging the United States government for war materiel, war services. An example of that is Lockheed Martin. These people are kind of a poster child for this. The percentage of Lockheed Martin profits that is derived directly from U.S. taxpayers in 2010 was 84%. In other words, 84% of the profits that they made came right out of yours and my pocket. The amount of taxpayer money which was listed as profit in that year was a whopping $3.2 billion that this one company made by providing war materials to our government. Meanwhile, the compensation of the Lockheed Martin CEO for the next year was $21.9 million. Now remember, you and I are paying that man's salary. A former Lockheed Vice President, Bruce Jackson, who chaired the Committee for the Liberation of Iraq in 2002 and 2003, formed the most influential lobby group for the Iraq War, that Committee for the Liberation of Iraq. And he was the Vice President of Lockheed Martin. So this is really important to understand, because these folks who are profiting so excessively on the U.S. contracts with these companies are the ones who are urging us to get into these wars. In all, the military contractors employed 682 revolving door hires in 2010. And these are individuals who oversaw arms companies while in government and then went on to work for the same firms. So we have that revolving door concept is very important, because the people who are making the decisions about wars and about military spending are very often the ones who are profiting from it, have profited from it, or will profit from it. The ideal distribution of contracts is not determined by who can do the best job, but the best way to do it, as this economist and former Pentagon official said, is to build it in all 435 congressional districts. And it doesn't matter whether it works or not, because then the member of Congress from that district will defend the contract because they're getting pork from it in their district. And this is very important to understand. As it says here, In 2009, Lockheed Martin placed full-page ads in the Washington Post showing the number of jobs for the F-22 fighter project by congressional district. If that doesn't make the point, I don't know what does. Lockheed Martin is, as I say, a poster child for the military contractor, because they made $2.8 million of donations in the 2010 electoral cycle, and in 2012 they've already put $1.6 million in. And these are donations that they make to the people who are going to be making the decisions that they want made. In addition to that, they spend $15 million on paid lobbying. They make political donations on both sides of the Republican-Democratic divide. They made a donation in the 2011 to 2012 political cycle of $14,000 plus to Barack Obama, but they also paid almost $16,000 to Ron Paul. The total to the congressional incumbents in the 2012 cycle so far is $1.4 million. So these people are big players. And when the representatives for Lockheed Martin walk into your office, if you're a congressperson, you are going to listen, because they are going to determine whether you have the money to fund your next campaign. What do the military contractors do? Well, they do everything that the government used to do by itself. They feed the troops, they maintain the facilities and equipment, they transport cargo, they wash clothes, they provide security guards for bases and diplomats, they engage in military actions. They're doing everything that the military used to do, and they're making a profit on it. So obviously, it's going to cost more money. Whose money? Your money and my money. This business of contractors is very important to understand, because taking the war in Afghanistan, you can see from this graph that the number of military contractors over there has at all times exceeded the number of troops that we have over there. And they continually do that. So we are paying more people to be military contractors than we are the troops that we say that we want to make sure that we protect. When we outsource the military this way, what are the implications? Well, first of all, powerful companies promote war because it's profitable, and we saw that a little bit earlier. That was the business of putting the contracts in all 435 congressional districts. The profit motive in war can be very counterproductive. The oversight of contractors is negligible, and the contractors often do poor jobs. When you have a person in the military ordered to do something by a superior officer, that officer then has control over what happens. However, if we assign those jobs to contractors, we may not have anywhere near as good oversight. The most common types of contracts are cost-plus contracts, and they encourage waste and unnecessary spending, because you get the cost plus a certain profit. If the costs are higher, you make more money. It's just that simple. So here's a picture that shows what really happens. We're told that a rising tide lifts all boats, but the boats tend to be the large corporations, while the ship of state sinks to the bottom, and all of us are actually on that ship of state. So that's how we're actually spending our money on the military. And when we do that, we are militarizing our country. Let's see what the militarization of America actually costs us. First of all, we have the macroeconomic costs. What do we mean by that? Increased spending on the military relative to other parts of the economy means that we have fewer jobs in other parts of the economy. It means we get higher interest rates, and it means we get greater inflation. In other words, a weaker economy. Another thing, and this is very important to understand, is that we're often told that the military creates a lot of jobs. Nothing could be further from the truth. While it is true that if you spend $1 billion of federal money on anything, it will create some jobs. The fact of the matter is that if you spend it on the military, as shown on the right here, you will get fewer jobs than if you spend it in any other sector of the economy. And this has been shown by study after study after study beginning in the 1970s. So, to sum it up, war makes a lousy jobs project. What else does the militarization of America cost us? Well, there's environmental costs. Did you know that the U.S. military is the biggest polluter in the world? It generates an estimated 750,000 tons of toxic waste every year. And did you know that the military burns an estimated 20 million gallons of gasoline every day? That's about the same as the entire country of Iran, which, remember, is a large oil producer. Furthermore, the military writes its status of force agreements to exempt the United States from the responsibility for cleaning up environmental damage. These status of force agreements are the agreements that it makes with other countries when it sites bases there. And right there in those agreements, it says that the U.S. isn't going to have to clean up our environmental damage. The result is huge environmental messes all over the world, but especially in our own country. Another thing that the militarization of America costs us is it weakens our democracy. Let's see how. Militarism restricts our freedom at home. And militarism brings immense amounts of money into the political system, as we've seen, which corrupts it. A great example is in Maryland, where this PowerPoint presentation was originally developed by our partner over there. The county council in Montgomery County in Maryland passed a resolution which urged the United States Congress to make major reductions in the Pentagon budget. And there was a bunch of other language there. Well, Lockheed Martin, our old friend, started having its lobbyists calling around. Remember the $15 million that was being spent on lobbying? It started having its lobbyists call around to the powers that be in Montgomery County, and 2 of the 5 supporters of the resolution dropped off, and the resolution was consequently withdrawn. So the attempt that the people made to get their voice heard by petitioning their government for redress of grievances was immediately cut off by the lobbying of Lockheed Martin. In what other ways can militarism threaten our democracy? Militarism erodes fundamental rights. It causes legalization of torture, as we've seen at the Guantanamo base, and the people who were captured as so-called terrorists during the war in Iraq. Then the people who were given trials at Guantanamo were tried not under the usual court regime, but under kangaroo courts under the Military Commissions Act. And now, under the National Defense Authorization Act of 2011, we lost the right of habeas corpus, which is an important Fourth Amendment right, which was granted by the Bill of Rights, which, of course, was part of the founding of our country. Another thing that militarism does is it demonizes certain citizens who lose basic rights. Examples are the Japanese during World War II, the Arabs during our conflicts in the Middle East, and Muslims in general. It also leads to secrecy, which is incompatible with democracy. An example of that is the Patriot Act, which was passed immediately after 9/11.